We're wrapping up UFC 119 right here on MMAfighting.com alongside Mike Chiappetta. I'm Ariel Helwani. And Mike, the event just ended, and certainly an interesting main event, and perhaps the fans here in Indiana not going home all too happy. Let's start with the main event. Frank Mir pulls out a knockout victory in the third round in kind of a little bit surprising fashion. The fight wasn't really going that way. First, let's talk about his performance. Were you surprised with his game plan?
I wasn't too surprised. I think that Frank felt that he was going to be able to bully Mirko a little bit in the corners. As he said, he's been working on his wrestling quite a lot heading into this fight. But he, he's used to being a defensive wrestler. In the last couple of fights, he's fought against Brock Lesnar and Shane Carwin, and now he has to be an offensive wrestler. And Cro Cop's takedown defense is a lot better than people give him credit for. So he struggled with the takedowns, but he got the finish. I mean, it was not the prettiest fight of all time, but he got the knockout finish. So Frank has to be happy with the final result, if not the way he got there.
He's coming off of that bad loss to Shane Carwin. At this point, is it just, okay, a W on his record and let's move on to the next thing? Is there anything that you can really say, okay, Frank's back, he's back in the mix, things like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think at this level of the game, yes. You walk away with a win, it's a good night, regardless of how you got there. He wants to get back in the title mix. Mirko Cro Cop, he has not looked all that great in the last few fights, but he's still a legend. So that a win over him still means something, even though he's not the legend that he once was in terms of the way that he fights. So a win is still important. You got to get back in the title mix by winning. That's the only way. So it doesn't matter how you get there. He got there.
If you're the UFC, what do you do with Mirko Cro Cop now?
Great question. I don't know. I mean, I think he still has some name value to some crowds. I think maybe he'd be maybe a better attraction in Europe for some of the European cards at this point for them, when they go over to the UK and places like that. He still has a fan base in the US too. He got a big ovation for this fight. To me, when I watch him fight, though, I look at him and I say, it seems like he's struggling to pull the trigger. That's what I see. Frank gave him a lot of respect before the fight and after, said his punches still look pretty quick and there's something to be feared, and they are. I mean, if they connect, it's still there. It just doesn't seem like it comes as instinctively to him now, and being knocked out in pretty devastating fashion. You always wonder how that's going to take a toll too, as we saw when it happened when he fought Gonzaga. He seemed to change after that. This is the second time he's been pretty much knocked out cold. So we'll see if that has like a mental effect that goes along with the physical issues that he's having.
Give us your prediction. Will we see Mirko fight again? And B, will that be inside the octagon?
Well,
I know the fight just ended, but what does your gut say?
I mean, I will say he looked pretty dejected in the corner afterwards. When he got up from the knockout, he didn't know what happened. His corner told him what happened. He sat down on the stool. He looked very dejected, and I think he's probably not too happy with his last couple of performances, and now this one where he gets suffers another knockout. As we said in the pre-fight show a couple of days ago, the one thing is he's always been a very durable fighter, and now he's knocked out again. So I'm sure he's going to have to go home, talk to his trainers, and reassess things, see if he really wants to continue doing this. I have a feeling we will see him at least one more time, but I'm sure there's probably thoughts in his mind. He's talked about it before retiring, so losing in such devastating fashion, I'm sure he'll at least think of it again.
Let's move down the card here and go to the co-main event. Ryan Bader defeated Little Nog, and some of the fans weren't all that impressed with the fight, and in particular, perhaps his performance. Did we learn anything about him? I mean, can you now say, all right, this guy deserves to be in the discussion with the John Joneses of the world?
Yeah, I think we definitely learned something about him. Anytime you move up to such a level of competition, every time in the UFC, he's been moving up a little bit at a time. And last time out was Keith Jardine. He knocked out Jardine. Everyone would say that Antonio Nogueira is a step up from Keith Jardine, and he passed that test as well. It was a dangerous fight for him because, as we know, Nogueira is so dangerous on the ground, and Bader wants to put the fight there. He was really never in any trouble at all in submissions. That's a great sign because Nogueira is a great submission guy, and particularly for me, watching him on his feet, never in any trouble whatsoever. Nogueira is a great boxer. Bader more than held his own, and had a couple takedowns, had some really good ground and pound against him. Just couldn't get the finish, but that's not really that big of a surprise against someone who's as experienced as Nogueira. I think in time Ryan Bader's going to get there where he's going to become more of a consistent finisher. But as you move up the ladder, it gets more difficult to finish.
Is that the fight you want to see next for him, John Jones?
I think that's a fight a lot of people want to see. I mean, these are two guys progressing kind of on equal lines. They're kind of doing things, going at the same pace, so to speak. So I think that's a fight that's been talked about a little bit, and I know it's a fight that John Jones' camp will gladly take, and I'm sure Bader would be happy to take it as well. The only thing I wondered about is if the UFC would want to kind of get rid of one of their, kind of eliminate one of those challengers from the title picture, being two young, undefeated guys at the same time. It would be a great matchup. It's something I'd like to see, but that may dissuade them. We may see one more guy in one of their ways before they get, to each other.
Yeah, some might say that's the reason why we didn't see Shane Carwin fight Cain Velasquez, maybe a year or so ago. Chris Lytle has always been this sort of mid-tier welterweight. Here he comes in his hometown, huge fan favorite. I mean, probably the guy who got the biggest ovation, defeats the guy who stopped him from getting that title shot 4 years ago against GSP after TUF. Now he's on a 4-fight winning streak and seems to be so confident out there and really putting it all together. How impressed were you with him?
I was really impressed. He really seemed, he wasn't, Chris likes to get in brawls. This wasn't a typical Chris Lytle brawl in the sense of some of the others. It was kind of controlled brawling. There wasn't not, just crazy winging punches just going for a knockout. He really respected Matt's power, and you could see that because it was more traditional, like boxing combinations, which is something he's very capable of. He's boxed before, but it's something he sort of sometimes ignores against other guys that maybe he doesn't think have the knockout power. So I think it'd be interesting to see if he continues using the same style, how far he can go. Like you said, 4 wins in a row in the UFC, a streak like that, you're getting close to being a contender. And, he's 35 years old. I'm sure he knows that, his time is running short. He's making a serious push to try and get one run at the title. He could have had a title shot back when he fought Serra the first time. It didn't happen. Now this is getting him closer. I think he's still a couple wins away, but 4-0 is a pretty good stretch.
On the flip side, what about Matt Serra? Where does he go from here?
I don't know. As we know, Matt fights pretty infrequently. Sometimes he only fights once a year. I'm sure he'll probably take some time off after this, spend some time with his family. But I think he still has at least a couple fights ahead of him. He's been, pretty much a UFC lifer since he got here. And, I'm sure he's going to continue to fight. He'll probably take some time off and reconsider. I think he still likes fighting. He still is competitive. It's not like he was severely outclassed in this fight. He's really been in every fight he's been in since St. Pierre knocked him out the second time or TKO'd him with knees to the body. So he doesn't get dominated by top guys. He's very competitive. So he still belongs here if he wants to be here.
Evan Dunham, Sean Sherk, certainly a controversial finish because it seems as though a lot of people in the media row and as well at home thought Evan Dunham, and in the stands as well, they were very vocal that they thought Evan Dunham won the fight. Do you agree?
I do agree. I scored the fight for Dunham, but it was a close fight. I really did think Dunham won the second and third rounds pretty handily. But you never know, when you leave it in the hands of the judges, as we say over and over and over, and it's just proven repeatedly. But I thought Dunham, even in defeat, we learned a lot about him. I mean, fighting a former champion, a guy who has only lost to former UFC champions. I mean, and he came that close to beating him. And if one other judge had swung his way, he beat a former champion and a guy who's been in there with a lot of legends and beat some and only lost to a few. So we know Evan Dunham's for real. I think he'll probably still make a run at the title at some point. He's still young. He's very talented, and we see he loves to fight. Man, he got busted up pretty good in the first round. Was bleeding pretty heavily. Still, he came out of the round with a smile on his face. He was happy. You can tell he's a guy who loves what he does, and so I think he's going to continue to improve.
All right, finally, let's touch on two heavyweights. First, Matt Mitrione, a very big win for the former Purdue Boilermaker. He comes in here with a big smile on his face and just slugs it out with Joey Belchan, one of the more entertaining fights of the night. Personally, I mean, you think about the guy who was on TUF just a year ago and how much he's improved since now. I mean, it's really an amazing story for considering what he's done in the last year or so. Is this guy ready to fight some of the top-tier guys in the heavyweight division, or would you like to see him fight a few, lower to mid-tier guys? Because considering the fact that, the guy has only fought 3 times in the UFC, and he hasn't really fought outside of the UFC all that much.
Right. Yeah, I think he probably still needs a couple more sort of seasoning fights. Joey Beltran's a very, very game fighter, and he came to fight in this one for sure. It was pretty back and forth, but yeah, I think Matt's still at the level where he needs a couple more fights to get more experience under his belt. You know, maybe fight a guy who's more of a wrestler, or see how he is when he gets to the ground. Because we saw Joey Beltran got him to the ground today, and he gave him some problems there. I think it was the first round. So I think Matt probably, you know, he still needs a little more seasoning. He's not quite there to the level of, you know, fighting elite heavyweights, but I'm sure he'd admit that as well. He's only 3 fights into his pro career as we know it, and he's still got a little ways to go.
And who would have thunk it? The most dominant performance of the entire night goes to Sean, the curtain jerker, McCorkle. Submitting Mark Hunt in just 63 seconds. I mean, what an amazing story that is. The guy comes out to I made it. He's standing there on the edge of the cage just looking at the crowd. The guy who talked all that smack online finally makes it to the UFC against, you know, this sort of legend coming over from Pride and who has fought some of the best. And what he did, nothing short of remarkable, right?
It really was. You know, as we said in the pre-show, you never know how a guy making his debut in the UFC is going to do. You know, are the bright lights going to overcome him? Is he going to be too nervous? I mean, this is a guy, you know, you had a chance to talk to him. He was just, he seemed kind of overwhelmed about being here, you know, and he talked about being nervous. He was open about that. And when he got out there and the lights were the brightest, you know, the guy shined. You know, you got to give it to him. I mean, that's a great win. And yeah, I'm sure he's going to get another crack in the UFC. So he not only lived his dream, but he's going to live to fight another day.
So there you have it. You want a silver lining? Think of Sean McCorkle, a great guy who got a very big win in his UFC debut. For Mike Chiappetta, I'm Ariel Helwani. That does it for us here in Indianapolis. Thank you so much for watching our coverage of UFC 119.